Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. Tonight's broadcast is a live question and answer. So we have an email that you can always send questions, suggestions, feedback, requests. That email is webinar@evoketherapy.com. We collect the answers that come in through that portal, through that, and we put them at the top of the stack. If you're attending live, and that means you're an Evoke client alumni, either of our intensive program or a parent of our wilderness program. If you're attending live, you could submit questions at any time. If you're a sibling or family member of an Evoke client, you're also welcome to submit questions at any time. And those questions will get answered in the order that they are sent in. Before I begin tonight's broadcast, I just want to make a couple of announcements coming up. I'm actually not going to be there at this thing, but my daughter is going to be at the Young Adult Intensive. It's coming close. It's just a few days away, November 4th in Manhattan, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. I think it's 4 p.m. now, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. This is if young adults are feeling confused, if they're feeling stuck. My daughter, Reedy, who is a fantastic facilitator, will be running that. We also have 2 intensives coming up. At the time of the holidays, there can be a lot of stress and difficulty, especially as you go back home or welcome people into your home. I can't think of a better investment in your time than the Finding You Intensive. Our next offering is December 6th through 10th. That's in person. We also have an online version. It's about a third of the cost and half the time. So if resources are limited, if finances are limited, if time is limited, the online option that we started during the pandemic and decided to keep on is a wonderful opportunity. So contact intensives@evoketherapy.com if you're interested in that work. Like I said, we have about four pre-submitted questions. I'm going to take the first question, and then we'll go into any live questions that might have come in during the broadcast. Let's get with our first question. First question reads, Part 1. My son therapist at his therapeutic boarding school 2 years ago mentioned our son had disorganized attachment. I remember asking about how that could be, as I read that it occurs if caregivers are emotionally and physically unavailable. I tried, as an imperfect human, to raise our son in a securely attached way. He is adopted at birth. He was always oppositional. My older son did not like the other people to hold him, but he was able to easily go to college and move away. He seemed to have a quote unquote pretty secure attachment. Part 2. My younger son seemed fine separating from me and being held by others as a baby, and was always independent. How do you tell when someone is independent and oppositional versus being avoidant? Both of my sons were raised on what seems to be a pretty secure attachment, but doesn't personality and how they came into the world play a part in how they attach? What do you think about our therapist saying about a disorganized behavior? I did not get a very clear answer. I guess I'm curious as to why he presents as disorganized. Several questions. The first one I want to start off with, and I can't be too emphatic in this answer, is this. There's always the given and the made. Right? We always are a combination of our genetics and our environment. If you hear somebody saying it's only genetics, or if you hear somebody saying it's only environment, you know that they've missed an important part of the equation. That rigidity, and I hear both positions being taken in the world today, is obviously nonsense. Right? Somebody's genetic material, neurological material at birth is going to give them a certain capacity, give them a certain style, give them certain tendencies, certain weaknesses, and certain strengths. You mix that with the environment, right? And that's very, very complex mixing. And what you get is a human being. You get their strengths, their weaknesses, their limits, their deficits, and their resources. So it's always a bit of both. And I'm incredibly, and encourage you to be incredibly weary of anyone who proposes that it's virtually all of one thing and not the other. Even as we're becoming more trauma informed, some of the folks that are talking about trauma will dismiss the genetic contribution. And that's just silly. It's just silly. It doesn't make any sense. And I think anyone with common sense knows that. And the research is exhaustive. Common sense is exhaustive, but the research is also exhaustive to point out that there are going to be differences. If you adopt the child, the chance of having a different kind of neurology, of course, is inherent in that process. And so the difficulty of a secure attachment is increased when you have an adopted child because you're kind of throwing the dice with the genetic material. And oftentimes people that are giving people up for adoption are under great stress. So that environment in utero is contributing. They may be young, they may be drug addicted. That's not always the case, of course. But you're already starting to talk about a self-selection of people that give their children up for adoption, right? They're coming from a place where they brought this baby into the world and they've made the courageous decision that it's not best for the baby that they be raised in the home of the birth mother, for whatever reasons that we honor, of course. But you're already talking about a couple of suggestive predispositions for the child. And then you just take a child who maybe doesn't have any of that significant loading, but has a different way of thinking, a different way of processing, and you match them up with a parent, an adoptive parent, and you're going to see differences. Somebody asked the disorganized question a while ago. The disorganized category is pretty rare, right? It's kind of a, we don't even talk about the disorganized attachment very often because it's really rare. But my answer to the question, and I know you might not like this, is it doesn't matter. Really, when I talk about attachment and I'm immersed in attachment theory, I talk about secure versus insecure attachment. The style, the way it shows up is interesting, can be grounding and can make sense of your spouse, for example, or your child and how they respond to the world. But that's not the wound. That's just the style of coping with the wound, the anxious attachment. So when I teach, when I talk about it, I'm talking about secure versus not secure versus anxious, or secure versus insecure. How it manifests, yes, that might be predicted by the environment. If you have anxious parents that are clinging to the child, right, that are hovering over the child, you might have a different style of attachment pattern. Or if you have parents that are disengaged and unavailable, you're more likely to have somebody with an attachment where they're going to be avoidant, right? Not looking for solace or comfort or connection. But I'm going to say perhaps the most important part of this answer. I too have done my best job to provide a secure attachment, and I'm sure, I'm confident that you who have written this question and you who have listened, who are listening or watching, have done the same thing. But the fact of the matter is, like I always talk about, we all dent our children. We all come up short of the ideal. And because that's true, and we must lean into that. If we don't lean into the fact that we are part of this process and our humanness, our fallibility, our imperfectness, our lack of wholeness contributes to the equation, then we're really asking the child to carry all of it. Not just their own limitations, their own neurology, their own style, but we're asking them to carry our trauma, our deficits, our unhealed parts. So we have to understand that we have a significant part in this process. We are not all of it, but we are some of it. And how big of a puzzle piece we are to that equation is ultimately the responsibility of the child as they grow up. I tell children this when I'm working with them. I say, look, it's the thing that happened to you is not your fault as a child, but healing it and dealing with it is your responsibility. And we assume that your parents are imperfect. We come in with that acceptance of that premise, but it's going to be your job to make sense out of it, to deal with the dents and the bruises left over from childhood. It becomes your responsibility in your life. When I tell children that are, for example, adopted, I ask them the initial question, the initial interview, what part they think this might be playing in whatever struggles they might be having. And oftentimes they're very dismissive of adoption being a part of it. Some of it just is because of ignorance, right? They just don't know. Some of it is because there's a threat to look at adoption for children that have been adopted. They unconsciously believe that it will threaten their parents, that it will communicate to their parents that if they add weight to that part of it, that they're not being grateful for having been adopted, that they're betraying or emotionally abandoning their adoptive parents. Or it just might not be that they don't want to look at the painful thing. I love what Kohut says, the famous therapist Heinz Kohut, where he says the issue is in psychotherapy turning a neurotic, mentally ill person into a regular suffering human being, to turn human beings into everyday suffering human beings. That's our goal. So part of it is that we have to accept our part. We have to know that we dented our children. Our children have to be responsible for it. And our children have to take that up. And there's no way to escape that pattern. Whether your child is disorganized because they come from a chaotic environment or not, I'm skeptical of it. And in the end, it's not, it's interesting. It's interesting, but it's not really important. What we're looking at is security versus not security. Does the person carry around an internal sense, a felt sense that they're okay, that they're going to be safe? Because of the attachment experience, the secure attachment experience that occurs is that the child carries around a copy of the parent. The infant, of course, and the toddler use the proximity with the parent to kind of manage their safety. They look back at the parent as home base and they go out and explore the world, but they know they have somebody to come back to. That's a secure attachment. Right? The ambivalently attached child doesn't seek comfort from the parent. They will look very independent when they are young. Whereas the child that is, excuse me, that's an avoidant attachment. The child that is ambivalently attached, I'm sorry for doing that. That's how little I talk about the different classifications. The ambivalent child presents more anxious. And the disorganized child is unpredictable. It's not a coherent pattern. But really, the style doesn't matter. We're just looking at it healing the security. And we have some part in that. That's not blame or shame loading. That's just dealing with what is. Dealing with the reality of what is. Somebody writes a question about the listening for capacity scale. I understand what you are saying. However, it does not take into consideration the capacity of the person who is talking. When listening to my son, who talks to unload his anger, he doesn't necessarily want me to do any reflective listening. He almost wants me to be accountable for his problems, even when I have capacity and am taking care of myself. It seems my son only wants me to hear what he has to say and not to say anything back. I can only say minimal encouragements, and rarely get to the level of reflective listening. I find it difficult to reflecting back, because at times whatever I say will be incorrect or not wanted. The most I can do is say, that sounds hard. Just wondering what your thoughts are about listening to someone that is usually talking to me to unload his frustrations onto me and doesn't want to hear anything about accountability or even asking what I'm thinking. Of course, you're right. You're right on. And you're right. I don't talk about that in that handout, in that image that I've created. And there is capacity on the part of the person sharing. My assumption is the person that's sharing is already upregulated. If they're venting, I assume they're already not grounded. They're already a little bit raw. They're already triggered, if you will. That's, in essence, that's why they're sharing their pain, their sadness, their grief, their fear, their anxiety, their hurt, the anger, whatever it is. So I come in with that assumption, of course. But yes, as in terms of capacity, that's my level of capacity. But if I'm listening to a teenager, I don't reflective listen often. They feel that is condescending. My children are so accustomed to the skill language in our family that I try to do it very naturally. I just try to keep it quiet and maintain eye contact, but say very little. Oftentimes, when people get into the more advanced aspects of listening, the 3, 4, 5 on that scale, sometimes that comes from a place in a parent or a partner of wanting the other person not to feel what they're feeling. Like, if I do it right or well enough, I will resolve your emotional distress. I have heard hundreds of parents, hundreds of examples from parents, if not thousands, where they have come back from an exercise where they have Listen by the book. They've demonstrated the virtually the higher levels of capacity to perfection, skill wise. And they come back and they'll say to me, "It didn't work. I wrote this in my first book. It didn't work." And my response is, What do you mean it didn't work?" And they'll say, "Well, my child was still upset, or my partner was still upset." And I said, "Oh, so you were using the skills to try to get them not to feel it anymore." And the fundamental piece of being a container is you're not trying to change the feeling. You understand that the only way to encourage and facilitate the moving through of the feeling of the individual, or the person moving through their feelings, maybe more accurately put, is to hear. But there's no hurry, there's no agenda, there's no eagerness for them to get over it. And that energy, if it's there, that eagerness, that interest in them getting over it, they can feel that. It doesn't matter how the skill is used. Doesn't matter how perfect it is. The thing that gets communicated between us most is the feeling, and it's all unconscious. And our unconscious speaks very clearly to the other person's unconscious, and vice versa. I'll tell one more story to illustrate and kind of support what you're talking about. I had somebody who wanted to make amends with somebody many years ago. So, at a moment of openness, at a moment that was critical for them, they wrote a letter, an email to their other person in their life, saying, I know that we left on bad terms. I know that you're angry. I've reached out to you several times. I know you haven't responded, but I want you to know that I'm available to hear your anger, to hear your hurt. I invite you to share it with me, and I will listen." The person on the other end received that message, that email, and wrote back and basically said, "Here's why I'm angry. Here's why I'm hurt. Here's what went on." And before our next session, my client crafted a response. I don't think they had sent it yet, but they crafted a response and shared it with me. And they said to me, "What do you think about my response?" They read it to me during the session. I said, "Well, it's not exactly containing. It's not really holding space for them. It's not what you said that you would do, but I also want to give voice to the fact that you might not really have been ready." The person, my client, had some really difficult and painful things going on in their life, and they might not have been as available as they fantasized that they were to this other person. And my client responded with this phrase. My client said, "Well, I would have listened. I would have contained if they had been reasonable, but they were acting like a spoiled, entitled brat." And I said to them, if they said it perfectly well, it wouldn't be containing. If they were being mature, it wouldn't be containing. We don't contain somebody's health and rational mind and clear, assertive communication that shows ownership. That doesn't require a lot of containing. That's not really containing, if you will. Containing means that the other person comes to us dysregulated, upset, hurt, angry, frustrated, sad, exhausted. Containing is holding on to something that is painful. But as I've learned in the last couple of years, as I've come to conceptualize in the last couple of years, holding space for somebody, a child or a partner, requires capacity, which means you have to be well enough at that moment to be there for the person. And so you have to often set aside your own needs temporarily. You have to set them on a shelf, knowing that you can get to them later, knowing that you can talk to your therapist, knowing that you can vent to somebody else or to your partner later, right? Put a pause on those for a moment. But the difficulty then in listening and setting aside your needs is that replicates or approximates, sounds like, reminds us of our childhood wound of not being seen. To keep our mouth closed and to listen and to not defend ourselves, to not give our side of the equation, our perspective on the issue, feels in our body, for most of us, like a repetition of the childhood wound of not being seen. So, not only do you have to be well fed and have a good be rested and have a good night's sleep before and not be too stressed out to be available for containing, but you also have to heal your trauma responses. The inability to listen can often be really tied to a trauma response that is not healed. The more work that I've done, now I wax and wane throughout the day, right? Everybody does. But the more work that I've done on my trauma, the more I've addressed my childhood wound, my narcissistic wound of having not been seen and heard as a child for who I am and what I feel and what I think for my voice, the more I unravel that and heal that, the more I'm available to the people that need me to listen, to my family, to my children, to my wife, and to my clients. So it's a complex equation. You are absolutely right. And in that particular graphic that I share with you, I am not talking about the sender, the one talking. I'm not talking about all their background and what comes into play. You're absolutely right about that. I'm focusing on the listener. Next person writes and says, part one, without going into too much detail, my mother has made it clear over the years that she regrets having me when she did because she had to make the difficult choice of leaving a career that she loved so that she could care for me as an infant. She returned to her work and has had a stunning career, but still hangs on to the opportunities and events she missed in that period when she was caring for me. I did my best to set boundaries I did my best to set boundaries so that I am not hurt by this behavior, resulting in my husband, kids, and I spending less time with her. There are other ways in which she speaks and acts such that she becomes the focus of attention and the victim. One of the themes is that she often raises in the notion of her and my dad, also an abuser with deep narcissistic wounding, who passed away before he could make sense of his relationship, giving me the gift of life. Part two, can you help me understand how to navigate these discussions, which inevitably end with me being ungrateful for being born? To be clear, I have the life that I have because of the work that I've done on myself over the years. And this feels to me like a bid for something that I can't give her reassurance that she is good or did good things or the right things. Thank you for any insights you can offer with us. Last week, I shared with my team one of my favorite quotes of all time from Ram Dass that says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. I love that quote. It's humorous, it's relatable, it's human, right? It's de-shaming that under any kind of circumstances where we're pulled back into regressive contexts that remind us and feel like our old contexts, we're likely to regress ourselves. We're likely to get younger, to lose insight and enlightenment. That's true of everybody. And that's coming from Ram Dass, who was a model of mental health and well-being. And as always, being the model of mental health and well-being, he didn't talk about how wise and great he was. He didn't talk about how regulated and healed he was. He never talked about how advanced he was. He talked about what an idiot he was, because that's what enlightened people talk about when they're teaching. They use themselves as the example of the human experience. Going back to the quote, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. I saw it posted. My team posted it. It went well. And I was thinking about it, talking about this with my family recently. And I was thinking about if I were imagining myself to be enlightened. Okay, just do this as a thought experiment. Imagine somebody enlightened. And somebody comes to them and says, you think you're enlightened? Go spend a week with your family. My thought experiment that I had one night is, what would the enlightened person say to that? The answer very well could be, no, thank you. I know that's too much for me. See, the enlightened person can own their humanity. They can own their fallibility. They can own their vulnerability. They're not overconfident. They won't put it to the test just to prove themselves, because there's no need to prove themselves. I can't tell you what to do, of course, but from what you've written, my thought is you might not be capable of having a relationship with her. You know, some cars can only go 55 miles an hour. That's just the way it is. You get to decide. I'll say this again. You get to decide. Nobody, including me, can tell you what to do or what you should do. But what I do want to say is it's an option within the realm of mental health. You might never be, you might have to have her completely out of your life. You might have to deal with the fact that when you set a boundary with your mother or father, your parents, with anybody, that they're going to tell you that you're a horrible person. And you have to find a way to know. That's an important phrase. You have to find a way to know that you're okay, so that when they say you're a bad daughter, it doesn't sink into you. It probably will for a little bit. You'll probably experience guilt and shame, but it doesn't compromise you. It's not kryptonite. It doesn't reduce you to rebel. You're able to set the boundary. So my answer is, it sounds like from what you're describing, she may not be somebody that you can have in your life. And I'm not quick to suggest cut off or running away. That's not what I'm saying. And I think people that are so accustomed to this kind of exaggerated loyalty that we're taught that we're supposed to have, right? I remember when I was a teenager and I went to an adult children of alcoholics teen meeting. Paradoxically, I remember only one thing from that experience, and that was one of the slogans on the wall that says adult children, or in this case I was a teenager, but adult children of alcoholics often have a pathological level of loyalty. They believe it's their obligation and duty to stay in relationship with people who no longer serve them, who no longer feel safe to be around, who are toxic. As I always teach, if my adult children came to me and said, being around you is toxic, Dad, my response would be, thanks for telling me, first of all. I'm happy to hear more if you want. But if you need to take space from me to feel safe and okay, you have my blessing. But because I take that position, they don't need to cut off from me, because they're allowed to take space. And I don't need them to support the idea that I'm a good dad. Now, I say that like I've mastered it. I struggle with it in conversations when I get feedback, for sure. I go to a poor me place of deep and intense and visceral shame sometimes, or I get defensive and try to explain my side of the story. That happens from time to time. But I'm speaking in terms of the ideal, what I aspire to, kind of the larger arc of my relationship. You're allowed to leave, and I support you. And I would encourage you to do that, not just with me, but with anybody in your life. But because I allow for that freely, my children don't want to leave. Why would you leave somebody that felt that safe? Why would you leave somebody where you don't need to take care of their ego? Why would you leave somebody that would support you, even if that support rose to the level where they said, I don't want to have a relationship with you? You don't need to leave that person. That person's safe. You can be angry at that person. You can be hurt by that person. You can express it. You can go to conflict with that person, and it doesn't devolve into something really toxic or shaming. So my overall answer is, I don't know, and I can't tell you what to do, but it may not be healthy for you to have her at all in your children's life. And you can bet you're going to get your butt kicked on the way out the door, and you're going to be told that you're a bad, ungrateful, disgusting, deplorable daughter. And that's the burden that you're going to have to carry for that. And that's the barrier to setting boundaries, is the shame and the guilt that comes with it. Looks like I have a 5-parter. I definitely need to put on reading glasses for this. All right. This is a 5-parter. Part 1. I love your podcast. Thanks for sharing your voice. We are doing our best to let go. To our 19-year-old, a high school 2023 grad who figured things out on his own after 2 years of offering help and him refusing help. He was literally on the doorstep of 2 wilderness therapy programs recently, but refused to sign the paperwork. He was hijacked by his anxiety and couldn't do it. He is not allowed to live in our house right now, and he has exhausted a 2-month stay with relatives. There is no friend network for him to rely on. He has been living in various hotel rooms this past week, which he is funding, and we are co-signing given the 21 minimum age for a hotel stay. Part 2. At this moment, our son has grappled with and continues to reject a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, and autism spectrum disorder. level 1 that he received in 11th grade. He is paralyzed with decision making and can't organize things to do. He was also diagnosed with ADD and dyslexia at a young age. He has a tech addiction, not gaming, but can't turn off social media, sports, pop culture, news, entertainment, etc. Up until 2 to 3 a.m. every night. His main autism spectrum disorder challenge is rigid thinking. There are no other co-occurring conditions, but he is a heavy load to work with through, especially since he says, I'm fine. I'm not anxious or depressed, and I don't need help. Part 3. He wants to go to college. We want to support him in that goal. At the right time, we, the parents, will financially support him in college after he participates in an immersive therapeutic work and has a good history of healthy behaviors. For example, good sleep hygiene, showing up for work, volunteering, engaging in constructive dialogue, organizing and planning daily living tasks, accepting supports, etc. That demonstrate that he will thrive in a college setting. He is intelligent, loves learning, and is highly capable of creating an independent life for himself. The social emotional pieces crumbled in 11th grade, the year our district went back to in-person school post-pandemic. He is worn down emotionally, has low self-esteem, unable to organize to do things on his own, and unwilling to accept support, therapeutic or non-therapeutic. He has many gifts, but lacks skills around resiliency, communication, executive functioning, and more. He recognizes he is financially dependent upon us, but doesn't treat us respectfully. Part 4. Yesterday was a low point when he ended up at a crisis center. He was boiling over on the verge of aggressive behavior towards me. He later sat in an overnight shelter for a couple of hours before my husband picked him up. He didn't ask to be picked up, but my husband and I also wanted to spare him from an overnight experience. Today, he said he will never forgive us. We are living by the hour, by the day, and it's incredibly disruptive to our entire family. 2 younger siblings are still at home. We all need a healthier way forward. We had our first family therapy session today, which was difficult but provided some hope. Looking for guidance on getting through this hump. Part 5. Our son is a sweet, sweet teenager who right now can't put one foot in front of the other on his own. We've encouraged him to find a job to support himself, but he's not capable of making progress given his current mindset. He is stuck in the in-between, not able to go home, not willing to enroll in a program, and not yet employed. I hope the only answer isn't living at a homeless shelter or on the street while he figures out next steps. How do you navigate the in-between practically, tactically, messaging, etc., and emotionally? A lot of good background. Very, very articulate description of your scenario. My answer is, I'm going to say it in a lot of different ways to illustrate the same energy. My first answer is, I don't know what to do. You've tried everything, virtually. Along that same kind of energy, remember that you can't control this. You can't win. You can't get what you want. You can only do what you can do. You can only choose how to lose. I can't tell you what to do. The crisis point that your son is significant, and he's got significant limitations. I'm not inclined to suggest to you that a homeless shelter or tough love is the answer. I don't know that. There's no right answer to your question. The answer looks like, and this is where I'll get to the messaging, is you get to decide, and it's your best guess. But if you're still trying to get him somewhere and he feels that energy, he might resist it to maintain his sense of sovereignty, his sense of self, his sense of independence. What I suspect that he struggles with in relationship to you. Right? He experiences your eagerness, and I'm not even going to say anxiety because it didn't sound like that. He interprets on an unconscious level your anxiety as control. So it reminds me of the time that I was teaching a class on codependency, and a psychologist, that was to all psychologists, a psychologist raised her hand and said, how can you suggest to a parent that we suggest to them? How can you suggest to us that we suggest to a parent to kick a child out of the home when the potential consequences of that child living out of the home is death. And I said, I would never tell a parent what to do. I would help a parent heal their codependency and they would decide. And when you're in recovery for codependency, you don't look for an answer that will be perfect or right or give you the outcome that you want. You look for your answer. Let me say that again. When you're in recovery, when you're healing from codependency, from your healthy, wise self, you don't try to make a decision that will work for everybody and get you everything that you want. You accept, excuse me, the limitations of your influence. You set whatever boundaries you want to, and you turn it over. Turn it over to the child. Turn it over to your higher power, to the universe. There's no way to win. There's no approach. There's no way to say it that will get you what you want necessarily. You might get what you want. And if you were my client and we were in therapy, I wouldn't tell you what to do. And if I said, "What do you want?" you would say, "Well, I want my son to get help." I would say, "But you can't control that. So now what do you want?" "Well, I want him to just X, Y, Z." And I would say, "You can't control that. So now what do you want to do? What do you want to do that's within your control? And can you deal with the reality that the outcome is not within your control?" And starting to embrace, it's really understanding what it means to be a parent, a person. It's really what it means to be a person in relationship with another person. And we don't have good models, good role models for that. We were shown in our early context that anxiety was love, that control and anger sometimes were from love. Our parents, the culture that we grew up with was confused. So we don't even know what it looks like and what it sounds like. When people, I hear people, because of this podcast, quote me. I might have a client bring it back to me, or I'll see it somewhere on social media, and somebody will quote me, and somebody will say, "Well, Brad Reedy would tell you to do X, Y, or Z." And my response usually is, "That's not what I would say. I wouldn't tell somebody what to do." If you want to know, I know this will sound crazy. I just watched the other night, I watched for the fourth or the fifth time the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think it's divine. I think it's the smartest movie that I've seen in the last 10 years. It's a metaphor for a woman getting served, finding the divorce papers that her husband was about to serve her. That's the storyline. All the metaverse, universe, parallel universes, that's just a distraction. Those are just metaphors for a different level of consciousness, a different level of awareness, for leveling up, for learning a new insight, for thinking and feeling differently. And in the early part of the movie, right after she finds the divorce papers, she doesn't tell her husband because she's shocked, and she's going to the IRS to get, to deal with the auditor, who's played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And somebody, I won't explain it all, it's too complicated, but somebody meets her and says, "By the way, I'm from another universe, and you're the one that's going to save all of the universes in the world. And so when you get there, I want you, this is the direction." In fact, that this visitor writes it on the back of the divorce papers. I didn't figure that out until a couple of years later, and the symbol of that. He writes, "Take off your shoes and put them on the wrong feet." And so when it gets overwhelming and distressed, she finally says, "I don't have any other ideas. So I'm going to try this absolutely inane suggestion to take my shoes off and put them on the wrong feet." Immediately. And then she presses this button. Immediately, she's transported to another universe. That is a metaphor for that's how therapy works. You try something that doesn't make sense. My thing that I'm going to tell you that doesn't make sense is go to Finding You. And if you don't want to go to Finding You because you think, well, he's got an interest in this agenda because he makes money off Finding You, go to Onsite, go to the Meadows, go to the House of the Call, go to the Refuge Recovery. Go to Karen's Breakthrough. Go to any program that facilitates this deep family of origin work that helps you understand how you were built, how you were raised, the messaging, the conditioning, the wiring, the whole movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once it's the same lesson for everybody. You have to get rid of the old life. In some religions, it's such a profound shift that is compared to the death and the rebirth of baptism. That's a symbol for the old life is gone. And I'm not talking about it from a religious, I'm talking about it from a metaphorical, mythological place. It's so other that it's symbolically represented by a death and a rebirth, being born again. And I'm not talking about the religious born again. I'm talking about, and then once you're on the other side of it, you can't explain it to the people that aren't there yet. It doesn't make sense to them. It sounds as crazy as in the movie when the one character eats a whole thing of chapstick, or somebody wipes somebody's nose and then rubs it on their gums. That's how crazy it sounds to them. Those are the metaphors used in that movie. So, got excited about it, but the answer is you're going to have to figure this out for yourself. And the best way that I know how to do it is to figure out yourself. And then you operate from a more grounded, safe place, not from a place of fear, right? You shift your base. Now you're not operating from fear anymore. You're operating from a sense of security and love. So whatever you do is fine. In the journey of the heroic parent, when I tell the parent, they write me or they call me and say, should I bring cigarettes to my 23-year-old daughter because she's asking for them, and they don't sell the kind of cigarettes that she likes in the where she lives. And I said, you can bring the cigarettes if you want to. This parent said, my father died of lung cancer and I hate smoking. I said, you can bring the cigarettes and you can give them to your daughter. It's legal for her to smoke. And you can say, I'm giving these cigarettes as a symbol that I'm not in control of whether you smoke or not. Or you can come without the cigarettes and say, you can smoke if you want to, but I'm not going to deliver them. You get to decide, and there is no right answer. The search for the right answer is the problem. The search for the right answer is embedded in the old way. The new way is you get to be a self. You don't get to be right anymore. You don't get to win anymore. You don't get to be good anymore. Those ideas are lost. Those ideas have outworn their usefulness in this world. But you do get to be a person, a self. That's why Pinocchio becomes a real boy. That's why Barbie turns from a plastic person to a real person. It's the metaphor of becoming a person. It's in all of our stories. That's the work in psychotherapy. That's the work, is learning, as James Hollis says, that you've accepted the wrong answers to life's most important questions. And you have to find new answers. It's a spiritual journey. It's a psychological transformation. The skills can help, but it's a deep, deep looking, a deep, deep discovering of oneself. And then whatever you decide will make sense. And I would support it. Set a tougher boundary if you want to. Let them come back home if you want to. Let's talk about the thinking, the sensibility that's going into it. That's what I always talk about that with parents. I don't talk about the decision of what to do because that's the wrong level of focus. I talk about where it's coming from. I talk about the thinking that underlies the decision, not the decision itself. And that's why if you ever hear me quoted as suggesting that somebody needs to do a particular thing in a relationship or parenting or with a life choice, they're not quoting me accurately. And I cannot tell you how many times I have heard clients and listeners and readers of my book quote me inaccurately because our brain thinks in terms of shoulds and shouldn'ts and doesn't understand this thing that I'm talking about. This development of discovery, of finding oneself, of learning who one is. All right, another one. This will be my last one. These are longer questions today. Two-parter. I am writing about my 20-year-old daughter who was adopted at 6 months and has ADHD, a history of extreme impulsivity and promiscuity, maybe attachment issues, maybe bipolar or borderline. She had a positive experience in wilderness, but about a year and a half ago struggled ever since. First, she went to a young adult community that wasn't very good. 7 weeks in, we pulled her after an incident with her therapist. Our daughter refused to consider another program, and after that, she came home. She did virtual coaching therapy with someone who had a wilderness background, but that therapist said the the virtual format was too distracting for my daughter. Then she was seeing two therapists in person and a psychiatrist who prescribed Wellbutrin and a mood stabilizer. She doesn't take her medications regularly and was not getting better, cycling through friend groups and relationships, losing jobs, and lots of conflict in her life. Part two, she prizes her social life over everything else. Couch surfs with different people and sometimes ends up in risky situations. She seems indifferent to any thought of therapy. She is avoidant in most areas of her life and extremely defensive. In rare moments, she will say that she is lonely and bored, and those feelings drive her behaviors. But in general, she does not like to look inward. We are considering a partial hospitalization DBT program, but if it was up to her, I don't think she'd do any kind of treatment. Most days she says she's fine and doing much better. I am wondering if we are jumping around with treatment too much and if she should just stay with one despite feeling like she's not benefiting from it. I also wonder if we should just let her live without any treatment if that's her decision. We are doing our own work, but it is difficult to live with someone who seems stuck, and whose behavior can seem so disruptive. You guys are doing a good job tonight of presenting to me these really difficult, virtually unsolvable problems. My future son-in-law shared with me, he grew up with two sisters who had extraordinary, severe physical limitations. In essence, they just were people. They couldn't move, they couldn't function. It was because of physiological issues, diseases. One of them died a long time ago, and one of them died very recently. And he said to me the other day, and he shared this with a group, he said that the gift that his sisters gave him was he learned what it was like to love somebody who you couldn't fix. And there was nothing that could be done for them. I mean, they could be given more expensive care, they could be catered to physically, but all they were is human. They couldn't get a job. They couldn't function without medical support and nursing. They were profoundly disabled. And his gift, and he, because of this, he's the kindest, most patient, best listening person ever. He struggles with getting his own needs taken care of, and you might imagine why, right? His needs become secondary. That's the wound that comes with the gift. So that's his work, is to learn to take care of himself and to learn to ask for his needs to be met. That's another story. But the gift is, and what he taught me was, and taught the group was, sometimes there's nothing you can do. And again, I'm not saying that's the case with you, but at some point we have to accept that we can't control and fix our children, that it's not our job to control and fix our children. What is our job? Our job is to support them in their development. Our job is to get resources so that we are regulated. I read a quote today by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and he wrote this. He said, "To love means to be there. To be there, first of all, for yourself and for all the wonders of life and all the earth around you. And once you are truly present, you can offer your presence to those that you love." And what my future son-in-law told me is that's all he could offer his sisters was his presence, his joy, his spirit, the comfort of their connection. So I don't know if you have an unsolvable problem. I don't know if there's any trick or hack or messaging or way of presenting it that you can encourage your daughter to get the help that you think, you believe, and you may be right, that she needs. I don't know. But I know, regardless of if that's true or not, it's important to realize what our job is and what it's not. And it's important to understand where we end and somebody else begins. And it's our job to deal with what is. Darth Vader, I'm a big fan of Star Wars as a myth. Darth Vader became Darth Vader because his wife was dying. And the evil emperor, a mythological symbol of the things that are driven by fear, by anxiety, by anger, by hate. The evil emperor said to young Anakin Skywalker, soon to be Darth Vader, he said, I can make it so that your wife doesn't die. I can control death. And that idea was so absolutely intoxicating to young Anakin Skywalker. He was willing to do incredibly heinous things to get that gift, to avoid dealing with pain, to avoid dealing with the fact that this life is temporary and that the people that we love sometimes will hurt. Darth Vader thought that by becoming Darth Vader, he was the solution, not the problem. Darth Vader wasn't going around thinking, I'm evil. Darth Vader was going around with the idea that he thought, I have the answers. In fact, he was so confident in his way that he tried to convert his son. He found out that his son survived his mother's death, Luke Skywalker. And he went looking for him when he found out that he was alive. And good news is Luke went and looked for Darth. And when Darth tried to convert Luke to his way, Luke resisted, eventually was threatened with death by the Emperor, and Vader couldn't stand it and had enough and decided to step in and decided to say, just like the movie I shared with you earlier, Everything Everywhere All at Once, decided to say to the parent, to the grandparent in this situation, if you will, to the culture, to the background, to the messaging of the dominant culture, I reject you. I'm going to stand against you, and I'm going to embrace my child, and I'm going to betray what I've been taught is right and is the way things are because of my love for my child. And I think that's what happens for parents. You want to show the greatest love to your child? Go to Finding You or one of the other programs I mentioned. You want to show your love to your child? Go to Al-Anon. Get a sponsor at Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous. And I'm not being dismissive or unkind. I need this stuff too. I do this stuff myself. I've been to many intensives myself as a participant. I go to therapy weekly. You show your child you show your children that you love them by the work that you're willing to do on yourself. The author Anne Lamott has a great quote. Somebody asked me one time, if you could put a quote on a billboard in New York City, one quote, what would it be? And she said that the only thing that I can do for you is work on myself. The only thing you could do for me is work on myself. Actually, that's Ram Dass. Anne Lamott's quote says, the way that we show our love to our children is to work on ourselves. Stop. This will sound crazy. Just as crazy as eating a whole tube of chapstick. But the way you help your child is by helping yourself first, by focusing on your healing, your mental health, by unraveling your programming, by finding you. And then from there, you're in touch with reality. You're in touch with yourself. I contrast it with, and I'll end with this idea. If I'm contrasting Darth Vader with the opposite, right? Manifested or symbolized in Yoda and many of the Star Wars movies. They were contemporaries, right? One was the ambassador of the Force, love, authenticity. One was the ambassador of the dark side, fear, anger, and hate. So we know how Darth Vader dealt with his pain by trying to control it. The question comes, how did Yoda deal with his pain? And the answer was, he cried. He grieved. He felt it. He accepted it. When he had a premonition, a sense, because the movies, of course, has magical stories just to emphasize, just to distract us just enough for the unconscious message to get in. That's what happens in these movies, is they distract us with the content so that we can hear the underlying theme and message that's being spoken to us. That's what all teachers and gurus do. That's what artists do. When Yoda found out, because he could feel it, that all of the young Jedi children had been killed by Anakin Skywalker, by the way, when he found out that they'd all been killed, it shows him, and what did he do? He wept. He sighed an enormous sigh of pain, and he felt it, and he dealt with what is. So do your work. I know you're doing your work. Go to Al-Anon, get a sponsor, get in recovery, go to Finding You, go to an intensive somewhere. Do your work and know that in the end, you are responsible for your serenity and peace of mind, not your child. If your happiness and serenity is dependent upon them getting better, that's a burden for them to carry. And you can see pictures. You can see pictures of my children all over behind me. I love my children. As much as Brad Reedy, I am capable of loving, that's how much I love these 4 people. It's as much as I'm capable of loving. So, having said that, I've had to learn that they're not mine. I've had to learn that my project in life is not to fix them. My project is me. And I am responsible for my happiness or lack of it. I am responsible for my serenity and my lack of it. And yes, when and if my children hurt, I feel it empathically in my body. I feel it like only a parent would feel it. And I have to grieve and I have to feel it. But if I try not to feel it, if I try to prevent the bad thing from happening, I end up like Darth Vader. I end up trying to control things, and I end up kind of crazy. All right, folks. Thanks for all of your wonderful, wonderful questions. I appreciate it. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I said, we have intensives coming up in person December 6th through 10th. I think it's the best way you can show your love to your child, the best way that you can contribute to their well-being. We have an online version November 10th through 11th. We have a young and adult intensives in New York City this weekend, November 4th, facilitated by my oldest daughter, Emma Reedy. That's from 10 to 4, I believe it is. We have a Returning to You in March 6th through 10, and then we have a Couples Finding You for 4 couples that I'll be running February 7th through 11th. You can also do a custom program for a couple, co-parents, or family. We call those Finding Connection or Finding Family. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups for current and alumni wilderness families. The next available offering is tomorrow night, November 2nd at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. November 21st is that next offering, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time on November 21st. And then we have a support group once a month for our intensives alumni. November 7th at 6 p.m. is that offering. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com for more information or to sign up. We have a trek program that you can go out to the wilderness with your child during the program, after the program, or even if your child is not a part of the program. We call it a family trek. It's a 3 to 4 day experience out in the wilderness. Think experiential therapy with your child. We have virtual coaching, kind of like therapy with coaches who can do it virtually anywhere in the world. We have a host of coaches with varied experience. So contact coaching at evoketherapy.com if you want to find out more there. We encourage all current parents to go to 6 support groups. Just try out 6. Any combination of alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. You can go to refugerecovery.org as an option. It's a Buddhist-inspired recovery program with less of an emphasis on a higher power. And of course, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local communities. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to your favorite podcast app or Spotify and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, or go to soundcloud.com and find us there. You can also go to our YouTube channel, Evoke's YouTube channel, and watch the rebroadcast of the video versions of these broadcasts there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And our intensives program, Evoke Intensives, has an Instagram account at Evoke Therapy Intensives. Some of these, of course, are for inspiration, but some of these also have announcements and services that you might be interested in. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, you can find Evoke Therapy blog on our website, which has wonderful content by our staff. If you are looking to donate for people who can't afford treatment or you can't afford treatment yourself, The 3 charitable partners that we work with are choosementalhealth.org, skiesthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. You can donate your tax deductible donation to a specific, you can earmark it for a specific population or a specific program if that be your heart's desire. All right, folks, I'm going to be away next week on vacation. So my next broadcast won't be until November 14th at 6 p.m. I'm going to be talking about social anxiety, something that I have intimate experience with. So social anxiety, I'll also be talking about it with kids and how to deal with their social anxiety. November 14th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for you. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and that love you, thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. It makes a great difference. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.